Winter had a way of remembering things the town tried to forget. It pressed its cold palm against every roof and fence, laid its white hush over secrets and sins alike, and waited. I remember that winter clearly, the way the snow fell not in storms, but in patient layers, as if time itself had slowed to watch what would become of Alara Whitcomb. She walked through town with her shoulders drawn in, not from the cold alone, but from the weight of being seen too clearly and not kindly enough. People looked at her the way one looks at a cracked teacup, still useful perhaps, but no longer worth admiration. Her laughter had once belonged to another season, before whispers replaced greetings, before her name became something said softly or not at all. Rejection does that to a person. It teaches them how to take up less space, how to breathe without sound. Alara had learned those lessons well. The town told its stories freely, but never to her face. They said she had waited too long for a man who never came back. They said her family name had thinned with misfortune. They said a woman alone in winter was either foolish or cursed. None of them asked how it felt to wake each morning knowing the world had already decided what you were worth. Snow creaked beneath her boots as she passed the general store, the church, the saloon with its warm windows and colder stairs. Inside those walls were fires and laughter and belonging. Outside was Alara, counting her steps, measuring her breath, surviving one quiet moment at a time. That was when the town began speaking his name again. Silas Crow lived where the mountains rose sharp and unforgiving, beyond the last fence post, beyond the patience of most men. He was spoken of as if he were part weather, part warning. Too poor, too strange, too silent. A man who chose the mountains because no one else would have him. Children dared one another to shout his name into the trees, half expecting him to appear like a ghost. But I had seen Silas with my own eyes long before that winter. I had seen the way he split wood with a steadiness that came from knowing hunger. I had seen the lines in his face that grief carves slowly, honestly. Silence clung to him not because he lacked words, but because words had once failed him completely. The town never noticed that kind of thing. When the idea of the marriage surfaced, it did not arrive wrapped in romance. It came like a ledger entry, a solution scribbled in pencil. Alara needed a roof that would not be taken from her. Silas needed nothing the town could give, but he did not turn away those already wounded. Survival has its own language, and both of them understood it fluently. The whispers sharpened then. Pity mixed with cruelty, curiosity with relief that it was not them. A woman marrying the poorest mountain man felt like a story the town could tell itself, proof that order still existed, that desperation always found its proper place. On the morning of the wedding, the cold bit deeper than usual. Alara stood in a borrowed coat, its sleeves too long, its warmth insufficient but appreciated. There were no flowers, no music. Just breath rising in pale clouds and boots shifting in the snow. Silas arrived without ceremony, his coat worn thin at the elbows, his eyes steady and unreadable. When the words were spoken, they were carried away by the wind almost immediately. No one cheered. No one cried. But when Silas removed his gloves and placed them into Alara's trembling hands, something unspoken passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But care. And in a winter like that, care was no small thing. They left town the same day. The road toward the mountains narrowed quickly, swallowed by drifts and shadow. Alara rode behind Silas, her hands gripping the saddle horn, her thoughts louder than the wind. Fear crept in quietly, wearing sensible shoes. She had traded one kind of loneliness for another, more complete one. Yet with each mile, the noise of the town faded, and something inside her unclenched. Silas did not speak much as they climbed. When he did, it was only to warn her of ice, to slow the horse where the path thinned. He watched the world carefully, as if it might break if handled roughly. Alara noticed these things. She noticed how he adjusted her blanket without comment, how he waited when her breath grew short. Small acts, done without expectation, begin to add up in the heart. By the time they reached his cabin, Night had already settled into the trees. It was no palace, just timber and stone, smoke rising faithfully from the chimney, but it stood firm against the cold, and that mattered. Inside, the fire caught quickly, filling the room with light that flickered like a hesitant promise. Elara sat near the hearth. Thawing hands she had forgotten were numb. Silas moved quietly, setting food between them, pouring water, tending to the fire as if it were something living. They shared the meal without ceremony, the sound of chewing and crackling would filling the space where conversation might have been. She realized then that survival did not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it came as shared silence, as warmth offered without demand, as a man who did not ask her to explain herself. When she lay down that night, the mountain wind pressing against the walls, Elara stared into the dark and listened. She did not know what awaited her in the days ahead. She only knew that the town's judgment could no longer reach her here, and that for the first time in a long while, she was not entirely alone. Winter watched from the windows, patient as ever. And somewhere above the clouds, something unseen was waiting to be revealed. Winter did not loosen its grip simply because Elara had climbed above the town. If anything, it tested her more deliberately, stretching days thin and long, asking her what she was made of when no one was watching. Morning after morning, frost traced white veins along the cabin windows, and the world beyond them lay hushed, as if holding its breath. Life with Silas settled into a rhythm shaped by necessity rather than choice. He rose before dawn, boots already cold, breath steady as he split wood and checked traps. Elara learned to read the weather by the ache in her fingers, to ration warmth and words alike. There was no grand welcome into this life, only quiet inclusion. He placed a mug in her hands before she asked. He fixed the latch on the door without comment. In these small attentions, she felt something unfamiliar stirring, the sense of being considered. Silas remained a man of few words, but his silences were not empty. They carried weight, memory, restraint. Elara noticed how his gaze lingered on the mountains at dusk, how his shoulders tightened at distant echoes from below. He did not speak of his past, but it clung to him like a second shadow. She did not press him. Pain, she had learned, opens best when it chooses its own moment. Days passed. Then weeks. The snow softened the edges of her fear, reshaping it into something quieter, more manageable. Elara found herself humming as she worked, a sound that surprised them both. Silas paused once, just for a moment, as if committing the note to memory. The first time he led her higher into the mountains, it was without announcement. He handed her an extra coat, thicker, older, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. The path climbed steep and narrow, the air thinning, the silence deepening. Elara followed without question. Trust, she realized, had already taken root. When they reached the ridge, the world opened in a way she had never imagined. Below them lay a hidden valley, cradled by peaks and untouched by roads or rumor. Snow-laden pines stood like sentinels. Frozen waterfalls caught the light, turning it into silver. Old cabins dotted the land, weathered but standing, as if waiting patiently for life to return. Elara's breath caught. It felt like stepping into a forgotten dream. Silas watched her then, truly watched her, as if bracing for disappointment. Instead, she smiled, a slow, unguarded thing, and the valley seemed to exhale. In that moment, she understood what he had guarded all these years. Not land, not resources, but refuge. A place beyond judgment, where worth was measured by care and endurance. The past found its voice that evening, not in confession, but in fragments. A name spoken softly. A hand lingering over an old scar. The loss of family, the betrayal of trust, the decision to leave before bitterness could finish its work. Elara listened, her presence steady, offering nothing but belief. Sometimes that is the greatest mercy. They might have remained there in quiet anonymity, but the world below does not like unanswered questions. Tracks appeared one morning where none had been before. Distant voices carried upward, sharp against the cold. The town had followed. Mayor Harlan Pike arrived with men who had once looked through Silas as if he were fog. Now their eyes measured the valley with interest, entitlement thinly veiled as concern. They spoke of ownership, of progress, of what could be taken and improved. They spoke as though Alara were not there, as though Silas were still the man they could dismiss. Silas stood differently then. His back straightened. His voice, when it came, was calm and unwavering. He did not raise it. He did not plead. He spoke of boundaries, of stewardship, of a life built quietly and honestly. Each word landed like a stone placed carefully into a wall. The mayor scoffed, turning to Alara with a familiar look, the one the town had always given her. Pity mixed with assumption, as if she had merely drifted into this life, as if she were waiting to be rescued. Something settled inside her at that moment. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. She stepped forward, her boots firm in the snow, and spoke. Her voice trembled only once. She spoke of choice, of dignity found where none was offered, of a man who gave without taking, who stood when standing cost him everything. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She simply claimed the life she had built. The silence that followed was deeper than winter. The men shifted, discomfort written plainly across their faces. One by one, they turned away, retreating down the mountain with their questions unanswered and their certainty cracked. When they were gone, snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving. Alara laughed then, not loudly, but freely, and Silas joined her, the sound unfamiliar and real. They stood together, watching the valley breathe beneath fresh white, knowing the world had finally left them be. Years have passed since that winter, but its lesson has never faded. Worth is not granted by crowds or customs. It grows quietly, fed by resilience, by small acts of grace, by choosing one another when no one is watching. If you have ever felt cast aside, unheard, or measured by someone else's narrow scale, remember this. There are places the world cannot reach, and lives that bloom far from its noise. And if stories like this warm something quiet inside you, stay with us. Subscribe to Wild West Tales, where forgotten souls still find their way home.